Welcome to It's an Inside Job, the podcast where we equip you with actionable skills to build resilience, enhance communication, foster well-being, and lead and coach with impact. I'm your host, Jason Lim, and every Monday we bring you expert insights and real-world stories to help you thrive and succeed. And with that said, let's slip into the stream. Hey folks, welcome back to the show. I'm glad you could join me for another long-form Monday. Now, have you ever wondered why highly competent technical experts sometimes struggle with transitioning to leadership roles, those management roles, or why traditional leadership training often falls short in equipping these professionals for success? And how can organizations better support the growth of their subject matter experts while unlocking their full potentials? Well, in this episode, we're going to try to crack that code, and it's a difficult code to crack. So today, we're diving deep into these critical questions with Alistair Gordon. Now, Alistair is one of the world's foremost experts on experts. He has coached and trained thousands of technical subject matter experts, or SMEs, from every specialist domain imaginable across the globe. Passionate about transforming how technical experts see themselves and their roles, Alistair's on a mission to help SMEs break out of their technical bubble and to understand and uncover and realize their potential. Alistair believes that technical experts have so much more value to add, and yet they are the experts at getting in their own way. So in this episode, we uncover a lot of insights and key learnings. So we're going to be talking about the hidden challenges of transitioning to leadership, why technical experts often feel stuck or misunderstood in their career growth, and how organizations can be better at supporting this evolution. Another one is the power of emotional intelligence, how reframing soft skills as essential enterprise skills can unlock new possibilities for technical experts, SMEs. And the third point is revolutionizing leadership development, why expertship programs deliver real, sustainable change compared to traditional leadership training. So let's slip into the stream now and meet Alistair Gordon. I'd like to welcome everyone back to It's an Inside Job. We are reaching all the way down to Australia today. That's correct, right? Where in Australia do we find you, Alistair?
I'm in Sydney, Jason.
Sydney, beautiful city. Alistair, perhaps we could begin by you briefly introducing who you are and what you do.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the invite, Jason. So I run a education business, really. It started off as a leadership development organization, which there's many millions around the globe. But our biggest focus now is on what we call expertship rather than leadership. And it really the business focuses on helping subject matter experts around the world really fulfill their potential and probably get out of their own way a little bit, which maybe we'll be talking about. There's about 40 million of these people around the world, all sorts of technical experts, IT, engineering, health, science, whatever. And so our focus is really and we've been working with sort of 4,000 or 5,000 in the last few years to understand their challenges and help them break through what we call the technical barrier.
How did you find yourself in this intersection between sort of technical expertise and leadership? What brought you to this crossroads?
Well, there was a CIO who attended one of our leadership programs, Jason, and he probably a bit unwillingly, if he was being honest. And at the end of the program, he said to me he had a floor full of IT specialists who absolutely were critical in operating a company. They kept the lights on, did all the innovation, solved all the technical problems, kept people safe, etc. And they needed some of what was in this leadership program. And did I have anything for them? And that was literally the genesis of a business that's now been going for 7 years. And we're delivering programs around the world to subject matter experts. So he's still a good friend, and he was my first customer.
So just to clarify, because a large portion of the audience of this podcast may not be sort of English as their first language. So when we talk about SMEs, subject matter experts, can you just sort of maybe a little more deeply define what that is, sort of operationally define that, just to set the foundation here for our
Yeah,
conversation?
yeah, by all means. So if you take a typical organization, medium or larger organization, there's probably maybe 500 or 1,000 or 5,000 employees. About 20% of those employees are what we call experts. That is to say, they have deep specialist knowledge about one particular sort of function. So the most obvious group that everybody think of are IT specialists, notwithstanding that, there are lots of different types of IT specialists, software engineers, coders, network engineers, etc. And those experts, they could be engineers, they could be finance specialists, marketing specialists. They don't have anyone reporting to them. They're not people leaders. They're not running teams, although some of them might be running teams, but they're employed for their deep technical specialist knowledge. And I might add, corporate lawyers and, for example, are a really good example of where you have very senior people inside large organizations who are a lawyer and they look after their custodians of the legal frameworks inside that business. They're not people leaders, but they are the go-to expert for particular knowledge. And they almost play the role of internal consultants inside most organizations. But they're a little bit difficult for the normal development systems to manage because they don't fit comfortably on a organizational chart. They're not a people leader, and yet they're absolutely critical to the function of the organization. So they're vital, and their work is mission critical. But they're a little bit forgotten, if I'm honest, by a lot of the leaders in the organizations.
Yeah, from my experience, and yeah, again, this is anecdotal. For me, a lot of them are the nuts and bolts that can hold the technical, the expertise, or whatever the foundational part of that company is together, right? Because they're not so much as a support function, but they are sort of what keeps the connective tissue of what makes that business thrive. So I'm curious, you've called it a technical bubble. I was wondering, what is the reason many of these, if we could just use, instead of saying subject matter expert, SMEs, if we could just use that acronym, what is the reason a lot of these SMEs get stuck in this technical bubble from your vast experience?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the perfect question because, and it's a question they'd like to know the answer to as well, I might say. So, when you go down that technical road, whether it's in, IT or finance or marketing, really your technical expertise is your ticket to the game. So in order to be employed and be a valuable employee and gradually get more pay and get more responsibility, you have to develop super technical prowess in whatever area you're working in. And technical experts like developing that expertise. That's their shtick, if you like. They really enjoy being really, really good at something. They love playing with things and breaking things and putting them back together again. It's sort of part of their personality. So they focus on building their technical expertise. And our data suggests that really the first sort of 5 years of their technical journey, they're getting basically competent. And then the next 10 years, they're building that technical expertise and then adding lots of technical experiences on top. And they sort of 12 to 15 years into their career, they are, as you say, absolutely guru level technical expertise. They're the go-to person and what have you. But that's when they sort of get stuck in their technical bubble and hit the technical ceiling because they haven't taken any time or been encouraged to build what we call enterprise skills that go on top of those technical skills. So they're very good at solving their narrow technical problem. But then when they're asked to do things that are more strategic or broadly valuable to their organization, they struggle because they don't have the interpersonal skills, the change skills, collaboration skills, business acumen skills that a lot of other people at their level 15 years in would have. And so they get pigeonholed, if you like, or they get stuck in their little technical, well, you're the IT guy or you're the finance guy, and off they go. And at that point, it's really problematic for them because they get very frustrated. We've done quite a lot of research, Jason, around whether or not they feel they could add more value to their organizations. And like 87% say absolutely, like we definitely could. And when we ask them, okay, so what's getting in the way? Their answer, maybe your listeners could have a guess for a second as to what their answer might be. But their answer is management. Management is getting in the way of me being able to add value. And that's really the first, that's our starting point with this cohort, is to say, is it really management? Or is it a bit of both? Is it a bit of management and a bit of you? And then we begin to start having that conversation with them. So I think they're encouraged to be as technical as they can, and whenever their development plan comes up for discussion, it's what technical courses are you going to go on? There's no focus on how they're going to become a much more rounded corporate employee so they can use their technical expertise to the maximum benefit for their organization.
Yeah, because I guess also again, this is anecdotal from my experience working in organizations, is that these technical experts, they climb through the ranks, and then all of a sudden they said, someone from leadership says, we would like you to lead this team. We would like you to lead this. So there is that promotion, but it's still on that technical line. But as you said, it's more of these sort of what you call them enterprise skills, with the communication, the collaboration, the cooperation type of things. They have high competence, as what you said, in their skills technically. But sometimes their psychosocial emotional intelligence skills, if we can just sort of put it under that umbrella, has not been developed. And that's where they get stuck. And I mean, what is your experience with that? Because what I hear is that a lot of them get sort of, they reach a ceiling per se, and then they stay there in that niche. But then there's others that kind of break through that ceiling, but they lack the other skill sets needed to collaborate, cooperate, and communicate at a different level other than the technical expertise.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right. Your anecdotal experience is absolutely backed up by our data. I mean, the most important thing to say here is this is a good news story. Like it's an absolute opportunity for them to do it. And if I had a single punchline, for all of the managers who listening to your podcast, it would be, other than go out and find out who these people are, because they're running your company and you don't realize they are. And if they all left, you wouldn't have a company. I mean, that's the reality. But the good news story is they are all intensely smart. So once they understand that actually adding these enterprise skills, as we call them, or psychosocial skills, as you're describing them, once they add those skills to their kit bag, they become twice or three times as effective and productive and adding value. And they can absolutely do it. There's no question. It's a mental thing. They don't actually believe those skills advance their technical career, but they do, as you've described. And so as soon as they can master those additional skills and add them to their technical skills, suddenly everybody wants to engage them. They get invited to more bigger projects, strategic projects. They can add value. They're asking all the right questions of the business people. And suddenly they're adding way more value and having way more fun, Jason, than they were when they were stuck in their technical bubble. But a lot of them, a lot of technical people say, I don't want to be emotional in my job. I can't afford to be emotional. I'm an evidence data-driven person. I can't, I have to make decisions based on logic, not on personality or liking people. And they have this misunderstanding of how these enterprise skills can actually supercharge the influence and value that they can have to their organizations. And once they realize that's the case, they can develop these skills really quickly, and they attack them with military precision.
I think that's a very salient point you're making because it is a limiting belief where they say, well, I don't want emotions in it. I'm very logical, rational, and analytical, and that's what it is. Very true. But I mean, we are human beings, and the whole point of emotions it's a sort of a chemical signature, a chemical message from physiology and psychology. We don't always have to ride with it, but or allow the emotions to rule us. But the idea to tune into our emotions and to figure out what that message is. Because, the physiology doesn't have syntax or grammar. It has chemical messengers in the form of modulators and transmitters and hormones. And so emotions are a very important part. So I think their perspective is correct. We don't want to just say emotional, but maybe it's to reframe or to give a new title to that type of training because it's like emotional intelligence. What does that mean, right? And so sometimes it's to broaden the scope because pre-interview, you talked about how sometimes these technical experts that are really good at their job and would probably shine in management and leadership, how sometimes they feel that, okay, there's something they're trying to fix me. I'm broken. And they just want to, slap some emotional courses onto me to make me a more rounded human being. Right. And I can understand how it's like,
Yeah.
how people can
look,
feel crippled by
to
that.
be honest with yeah, I think we were guilty of that early on. I think when we started promoting the courses, we were sort of saying, look, you need to be good at this, you need to be good at this, you need to be good at this. And we weren't doing the typical why frame, Jason, saying, what, why do you be? I mean, to bring it back to something, very practical, when we think about the challenges of a typical subject matter expert, and, those of you listening to your listeners on this podcast might think of people they know in their own organization. Here's how you can spot one, right? They are intensely busy, right? They have a huge workload. They're working on multiple projects at the same time, and their technical capability is vital to the success of all of those projects. They have very demanding stakeholders, and they have separate stakeholders for each of these projects. And those stakeholders, imagine they have 100% of Jason's time, and actually they only have 30% of Jason's time. So very demanding stakeholders. They are quite individual contributors, so they lack support. They don't have anyone they believe they can delegate things to. And as a consequence of all of that, they become the person that you go to fix things. This is broken or that's broken, and only Jason knows how to fix it. And so they become their own worst enemies in lots of ways. Now, when we ask people, well, how would you fix that problem? Because they're getting some fulfillment, but they're really busy and they're very stressed and they feel the responsibility of their role because they are the only person who can fix things. When we asked them how to solve it, they said, well, I wish my stakeholders would understand me better. And to your point about reframing, we start by saying, well, how well do you know your stakeholders? Do you know what motivates them? Do you know what they worry about? Do you know what their key performance indicators are? Do you know what success looks like on these projects? How emotionally intelligent are they? Are they detailed people? Are they big picture? How well do you know your stakeholders and what they want from you, and how best to approach them and address them? And of course, the answer, generally speaking, is not very well at all. That hasn't been something that they've focused on. They're very, very task focused rather than relationship focused. So our starting point is to say, if you want your stakeholders to understand you better, I think your starting point needs to be you need to understand them well. And of course, that requires, all of those emotional intelligences that you were talking about. It means asking non-technical questions to people, treating them like a human, etc. And because they've been so busy, they get unbelievably expedient. Like they just get stuff done all the time, and they never stop to build relationships and ask how people are, or how are you experiencing me as an expert, and so on. But once this begins to happen, then they can really begin to take back control, basically, of their own jobs, and start figuring out, what are the most important things they could do for their organization, and where are they wasting time, and how do they get rid of those tasks or delegate them to someone, and so on.
Because there's probably a lot of leaders listening to this podcast or listen to our conversation right now, and they have some sort of leadership role, and they have technical direct reports that report up to them, and they're thinking, this guy or this gal, I want to promote them. But they've been technically an expert at something for an SME for the last 15, 20 years, and this is their sort of habitual mindset. If you were to advise them as the coach, if they had you as a personal coach, these leaders, not the SMEs, but these leaders who want to promote the technical experts, what would you say the top three things they would need to learn or they would need to teach their SMEs in order to make that leap up to sort of that level where we're talking about on enterprise skills as you've articulated?
Yeah. So I think this is a really great question. So the first thing is that those leaders will probably, if they're typical, perceive the subject matter experts as problem children because they'll see them as blockers. They'll see them as people who are always negative, who are always telling them why things can't be done, people who don't appear to be connected to the strategy of the business, people who don't appear to be interested in the economic outcomes. And so they probably have, whether they realize it or not, they either have a direct bias, which is, by the way, my experience is most of them have a direct bias, or they have an unconscious bias. And that plays out. And of course, technical experts are their own worst enemy. I asked my software developer the other day, I had this great idea. And he spent 20 minutes telling me all the reasons it was really difficult to do. And at the end of the 20 minutes, I said to him, do you think it's a good idea? He said, oh, yes, it's a fantastic idea. I just wanted to make sure you knew how difficult it was going to be for me to do it and how brilliant I need to do in order to build this for you. And it was just this microcosm of interactions that go on all the way around. So what leaders first need to do is to consider that the normal things that they associate with high potential talent in their organizations, they have to reset when it comes to subject matter experts. Subject matter experts are not perceived as being by the talent teams as ambitious because they don't want to be people leaders. In fact, the last thing they want to be, by and large, is people leaders. They only go into the people leadership line, if you like, as you were describing earlier, because that's the only way they think they can get paid more money or have more kudos or get more seniority. So most organizations actually need to think about fixing, enabling experts to move forward and get better remunerated, even if they don't have people. So the first thing is the reframe. The second thing is I think it would be really cool for the managers to really understood what would happen if these experts weren't available to their company. And a good way for senior leaders to do that is to go and talk to the talent acquisition teams and ask them which are the most difficult positions to recruit for. And I guarantee you there'll be technical experts. If you lose a couple of key technical experts, most heads of technical departments will really struggle to replace that expertise. There's a lot of tacit knowledge that walks out of the organization when someone goes on to the other side. So I think a lot of leaders don't understand the valuable role that experts play. And then I'd love them to have a think about asking these experts, if you were running the company, what would you be doing differently? The challenge with that third question, Jason, is that most technical experts aren't ready to answer it. And this is where, they get into trouble. They only see things through the technical lens in which they're expert in. So a lot of our work around expertship is to get them to think and read much more broadly around what the organization is doing, its marketplace, its competitors, or its alternatives if they're in government, and be able to talk the language of the business so that they can engage the business properly, and then they'll be able to figure out, what their particular technical specialism can do for the business.
There's a lot you said there that are quite astute and a lot of salient points. So I just need to rewind and unpack. So just to rewind, one of the larger topics I hear you talking about is that maybe a lot of technical experts don't want to go into the managerial field, but that there should be maybe a technical line of promotion. Maybe they don't have people under them, but for higher salaries or bonuses, that they should create this. One of the companies that I used to work with is a Finnish company, YIT, and I remember they had a very, very clear and distinct two-line paths. Those who wanted to choose technical, and then they could go there, and they had that sort of so those levels and those pay levels, salary levels up as they could increase. But from your experience, do you find a lot of companies kind of there's a sort of a dead stop or a period at the end for technical experts where there's no progression?
I would say that company you worked with is the exception rather than the rule. If you take out tech, so big tech, understand that probably it's the sort of Steve Jobs syndrome where you have these really, really brilliant people and they don't have any. In fact, they're going around challenging everybody all the time. But what they're doing is really innovating, stretching, reframing product, value and even what we want to buy. So I think big tech understand that some of the smartest, better software developers and what have you, you usually keep just paying them more to keep them and provide them with lots of other sort of non-financial benefits, which is the case. I work with a couple of big tech companies that do that really, really well. So in big tech companies, that seems to be less of a problem. But if you talk about most typical manufacturing companies or government, in government in Australia, you're not allowed to be paid more unless you have people working for you. And so to your point, quite a few technical experts decide to go across into the people leadership role in order for remuneration reasons. But of course, they've not been running teams. They've not been on the leadership programs. They've not been developing their, stakeholder engagement skills or their emotional intelligence skills or business acumen skills. So when they move across from being a pure technical person into a team leader, they really struggle, in my experience, because we haven't set them up for success. That's not their fault. That's the organization's talent process. I don't know whether this is the case, in the countries that you work in, Jason, but over here, quite a few people use a thing called the 9-box grid. And without getting technical, it's a tool that the talent teams use to figure out who the high potential employees are. And the end result of using this tool is that if you arrive in a place where you get invested in, you get sent on courses and so on and so forth. And the 9-box grid is pretty simple if your listeners can visualize it. Up the vertical axis, there's sort of performance. So there's sort of low, medium, and high, if you can imagine that axis. And across the horizontal axis, there's low, medium, and high potential. So it's performance versus potential. And you can imagine 9 boxes being split up that way. And if you're in the top right 3, it's called the green pool. Some people may have heard of the green pool. And so if you're a high performer and you've got lots of potential to perform even better, you end up in this high potential pool and you get sent on all sorts of courses. All of these little boxes have names. And the top left-hand box, which is high performance, no potential, is called subject matter experts. That's where that box is. So the talent teams are saying these people are very high performers, but they have no potential. I show quite a lot of subject matter experts this 9-box grid. It makes them very grumpy, Jason, I've got to tell you. And the problem is, and this goes back to your question around how managers should think about things and how they could help SMEs, is that the definition of potential is wrong. Because the talent teams are using the definition potential to lead more people in the future. And so, of course, technical experts don't fit into that category, and they don't aspire to that. If organizations, and many organizations we've worked with have done this, if they change the definition of potential to potential is the ability to add lots more value, all of a sudden, lots of people from that technical expert box zoom into the green pool, and it's transformative for that organization because suddenly they're unleashing the sort of untapped power of all these technical experts by adding enterprise skills on top of the technical skills. These people just take off. It's so exciting. It's so exciting to watch them do it, and all it requires is a bit of reframing on behalf of the leadership in the way they think about who are our most critical people in this business. Another way they might want to think about it is who will come up with the innovations that will keep our business growing or our government department delivering even better services to the community. Who will that be? I'm sorry, it won't be people leaders. It'll be the technical experts who drive innovation. And once I start pointing that out to executive teams, like, what are the last 4 really good things you came up with? Who came up with them? They're all technical experts. It really begins to transform the way that people think about it. It's a big issue. The company you referenced at the beginning of the question, good on them. They'd be in the top 5 or 6% doing that. I think 95% of organizations don't.
In part 1 of my conversation with Alistair Gordon, we explored the unique challenges faced by technical experts when transitioning into leadership roles. Many highly skilled individuals in technical fields, they struggle because they lack sometimes the emotional intelligence or the broader psychosocial skills that are necessary for success in managerial positions. Now, Alistair pointed out that calling these soft skills doesn't do them justice. Technical experts need a wider range of enterprise skills, including collaboration, adaptability, and business acumen to truly thrive in leadership roles. Now, one of the key takeaways was the importance of reframing how organizations perceive technical experts. Now, these individuals often feel overwhelmed by stakeholder demands and operational pressures, and unfortunately, they're sometimes seen as problem children instead of being valued for their significant contributions. Now, Alistair and I discussed how leaders can engage technical experts more effectively by asking questions like, what would you do differently if you were running the organization? Now, this approach not only broadens their thinking, but also helps them feel valued, heard, and encouraging them to step into higher level roles with confidence. We also discussed the challenge many subject matter experts, SMEs, face in breaking out of their technical bubble. Now, this happens when their focus on technical work prevents them from developing interpersonal and business-oriented skills, leaving them frustrated and sometimes feeling undervalued. Alistair emphasized that once technical experts see the benefits of combining enterprise skills with their expertise, that means they can unlock a whole new level of effectiveness and productivity. It's a powerful reminder that SMEs are often the backbone of an organization, or what I think is the connective tissue. And investing in their growth creates ripple effects throughout the business, throughout the organization. For SMEs listening to this episode, Alistair offered actual insights on developing self-awareness and prioritizing skill building beyond your technical domain. And for the leaders out there who lead SMEs, Alistair, he highlighted the critical importance of recognizing, engaging, and supporting the growth of technical experts to help them transition more successfully into broader roles. I think this part of the conversation really set the stage for what's coming in part 2. We're going to dive deeper into the strategies and solutions that empower both technical experts and their leaders, to achieve meaningful growth and impact. So let's slip back into the stream of part 2 with my brilliant conversation with Alistair Gordon. And what I have found is that it comes back to the trailhead of our conversation where a lot of sort of traditional leadership training really doesn't work for these technical people because it's too soft. I don't know if that's the right the words, but it's not wired for they get lost in translation in these type of trainings.
Totally. What a great way of describing it. That's exactly how I would describe it.
Yeah. So my background is within clinical psychology and the cognitive science, and I have this deep interest in neuroscience. And so, what I have done over the years to address this, and that's why I really wanted to have you, I just wanted to talk to an expert such as yourself on the show, because what I've done, I've taken my different types of training, whether it's emotional intelligence or empathy or whatever it is, or communication. But what I've broken it down to, I've taken an unorthodox approach. And I've broken it down to how the brain works. I broke it down so they understand it. So I talk about the sort of the nuts and bolts of the brain, the different parts of the brain. And all of a sudden, this translation, even though it's not, nuts and bolts per se, but it's biological nuts and bolts, all of a sudden, these guys and these gals that are being in the technical rabbit hole for 15, 20 years, they light up because I'm kind of talking about the nuts and bolts of the brain or the nuts and bolts of the physiology and how that connects to people. And I tell you, it really lights up the room and it really allows them to migrate more towards these sort of psychosocial emotional skills. But that's what I have found. Again, this is just anecdotal and what I have found that
Yeah.
works. And this just lights them up.
Yeah, and I think we're probably both being very passionate about the fact that we do what we do because we want to help people, and when we see them flourish and blossom and so on, and it's very exciting. And I can imagine the approach that you're taking being very interesting because people, the technical experts, are interested in science. They're interested in how things work, and you also will be doing what we see all the time is you're helping them unpack what's been getting in the way of them being as successful as they would like to be. Now, probably our approach is a little bit more applied rather than sort of neuroscience. So we, in our programs, we've banned the L word, leadership. We don't talk about leadership at all because they don't want to be leaders and they don't want to go on a leadership course, and that's not what they want to do. 20% end up being people leaders, but that's a different story. It's not what we're attempting to do. And so, in our capability framework, which we've built, because we couldn't find one, so we had to build one. Stakeholder engagement and a real in-depth into stakeholder engagement and how, as a subject matter expert working on multiple projects, do you manage stakeholders? How do you understand and manage them? This is experts can see the immediate relevance of learning that to help them get through the day, so it's super applied. Similarly with collaboration, what are the secrets to collaboration between technical teams and indeed technical and non-technical teams, which is very often where all the barriers are. And, what sort of tactics can we use to improve that? And, how do we make good decisions about productive collaboration versus unproductive? So we and I'd encourage everybody in our space, if you like, to think very hard about it. You have to imagine yourself being a day in the life of an expert and understand that intimately and those pressures that people are under, because they're under a lot of pressure. They're very committed, unbelievably hardworking. My experience, even if the outside they can occasionally be abrasive or direct or apparently not they are absolutely, just like most humans, gorgeous people. And if you can help them interface with people in an effective way and improve their day, they light up just as you say. And it is. I've done leadership development and executive coaching, what have you, for, 20 years or what have you. This stuff is the most fulfilling by 3 times that I've done. This is right up there on the top of the mountain. And this is one of the reasons why, we're really focusing the organization on this, because there's a lot of demand for it. Very few organizations are doing it. But you're helping, and thank you so much for helping in just getting the message out there that developing technical experts has at least, if not a bigger payoff than developing emerging leaders. And that's really the message that people need.
Well, that's what I wanted to dive a little more into, is this concept that you've created, this expertship, right? And how I'd like to discuss maybe a little more about some of the foundational principles and how it's it's different from traditional leadership. Obviously, you've taken out leadership in that. I know you've spoken a little of it, but what would you say some of the foundational principles of expertship are, if we could maybe dive a little deeper than what we've already kind of discussed so
Yeah,
far?
so I think the key principles really are underpinning everything is andragogy. Many of your listeners will know that pedagogy is how you teach children things, and andragogy is how you teach adults. So you have to go super andragogy to teach technical experts, because one of the things that I learned very early on, and I've got the bruises to prove it, is that you can't teach experts anything. They have to learn it themselves, which is why you're unpacking, neuroprogramming and what have you will really help, because they want to know how it works, and they want to figure it out for themselves. So anybody approaching experts with the view of telling them what to do is heading for a really, really uncomfortable experience, which will ultimately fail. So the fundamental principle is that we have to put them in a learning environment where they're able to think about what's getting in their way, and think about what the possible opportunities to solve that problem are, and we get them to do it in teams. And it's amazing how the answer is always in the room. So the first thing is, I think, learning approach. That's the first thing. Secondly, I think it's really important to respect the fact that being an SME, subject matter expert, is quite different from being a generalist or a people leader. It's a completely different way of working. It's a completely different pressure. If the email system goes down and you're responsible for it, like, in a company of 5,000 people, no people leader in the entire business has felt pressure on that Monday morning like that. That
That's
is
a good
the
example.
definition of pressure,
Yeah.
and and you wonder why people get grumpy when people break their systems. It's because those sorts of things happen. And the irony is, just using an example, there's probably a team of experts in every large organization who works around the clock to make sure our email works, and their work, a bit like when you turn on the tap and you expect water to come out, it's a utility, and no one thinks about the effort that's put into that for that sort of seamless transition, safe transition of email until it goes wrong. And then everyone wants to know, whose fault is this? So for 364 days of the year, it's worked absolutely perfectly, and for 1 hour it doesn't. And my goodness me. So the learning environment will be one. The second thing from the expertship thing is we have to put ourselves in their place, and then I think we have to ask them what would they like, what value do they believe they can add, and what new skills are they going to have to learn in order to be able to add that value. We have to give them, if you like, a mission from God. Where do you want to get to? Most experts will say they want to be more strategic. They want to work on bigger projects. They want to work on higher value, higher level innovation. But they don't have any of the business context, generally speaking, that allows them to do that. So they have to, for example, change their reading. For example, those 26 Unix newsletters that they read every month, they need to cut that down to 3 and start reading The Economist and probably listen to your podcast. They need to really expand their ways. So I think it requires a respect for the role and the journey, and that really is will be my starting point, because so many of them have been on programs before and not enjoyed them, and they haven't resonated as you described early on, and they think that people are trying to fix them, whereas I think they have to believe that people are trying to help them go to the next level.
I think it also comes back to what you said before. It's not just the responsibility of these technical experts to sort of to evolve to leadership, but I think it's also other parts of the company need to evolve. Because I work in I've worked in a number of larger organizations, and it's funny if you move from one, like let's say accounting to travel to engineering to marketing or whatever, a lot of the business doesn't know how the other parts of the business work. So I don't think this is just a technical thing where they're just so super focused on some niche engineering challenge or whatever the expertise. I think this goes across the board. And what I have found is that if you sometimes have these lunch and learns, right, where one department will talk about sort of the governing details of what they do to another department, all of a sudden they start understanding the connective tissue that holds this company together. And I find there's a level of ignorance sometimes when it comes, not intentional, of course, completely unintentional, because people are so focused on what they do, but sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And so I just don't want to just put all the heat on technical experts, but I think goes across the board. And I think also what you're saying is that, technical experts, they may come off as a little abrasive, a little straightforward, really direct. Maybe they need to learn more diplomacy. But I think also on the other hand is that the leaders who are sort of leaders in the traditional sense have to also understand that these technical experts are probably guys and gals that bend over backwards, that have one of the deepest loyalties. And if they just reframe, I think that was a good word you used earlier, to understand that these technical experts, they have the most probably very noble and positive intentions. So their intentions are there, but it's sometimes how they communicate that the impact affects the perception that, oh, they're rough and abrasive. They're just their own little fiefdoms. No, and so that's why I think that there's this loss in translation that goes both vertically, horizontally, diagonally across organizations.
Yeah. Look, I think everything you just said you're completely backed up by our experience and our data and they I think they're incredibly passionate about what they do. Remember that an expert wants to be the very best expert they can, and so in our capability model we have three levels in our model. We have specialist, we have expert, and we have master expert. And most experts who come in our program are operating at expert level, and that's where they're quite transactional, maybe a little bit of strategy. They're pretty much now immediate. They're probably departmental, internally focused, what have you. And the level above master expert, where you're adding mega value to the organization as an SME, you can imagine is strategic. It's a longer horizon. It's creating competitive value or community value. It's just this high level stuff. And the stuff you need to know to be master expert, as opposed to expert, is completely different. And you mentioned there in passing that the questions they ask are critical. So most organizations are very siloed, as you've described. And very often the experts are working across these departments and don't understand what these departments do well enough in order to be able to shape brilliant technical solutions for them, whether it's in finance or law or IT or whatever. So a lot of what we do is to say, you've got to stop telling people what you think and start asking people questions. And this concept of expert as coach is probably the most fundamental tenet, if you like, of expertship, that you have to understand what the long-term goal of the business organization, government department, whatever it might be, not for profit, is, and understand the customers and understand what the customers might be asking for in 18 months' time. Then you can build a solution starting now that will deliver that customer value. But if you're head down, bottom up, just getting stuff done in your technical department, you've got no chance of adding extreme value. And most experts want to be in that extreme value place. They believe they've got the ability, and most of the people I've met have, to really add way more value, but they're just not going about it the right way. I've got one small piece of bad news, which is, and somebody said this to me, Jason, a few years ago when I started this business, and it's turned out to be true. Very true. Very thoughtful of the person. This person said to me, Alistair, your biggest problem is that the subject matter experts, the SMEs who most need expertship, will believe they least need it because they'll believe they're as expert as they can be already. And for those listeners who are still tuned in, I'd really encourage you to spend time with people who resist learning about enterprise skills and how the brain works and so on and so forth. Forgive them their early sins, because the people I've found who are the most resistant to this get the most out of it. It just, there's this lighting up that you're describing, but it's an exploding sun when they finally get it. So we've got quite a few organisations we work with where people they nominate to come on the program resist the nomination. Indeed, one person said to me the other day when I was at a program in New York, I said, what were your expectations of the program? He said, well, I thought I was sent along as a punishment, and when people laughed and what have you, but I took that very personally because that's not his fault. That's the leadership in his organization's fault. That is a huge amount of bias that person has been, exposed to over many years, and that's on us. And I feel that very deeply. So we have to. Don't imagine everyone's going to come rushing, giving you a big hug if you start offering them development. They'll need to be brought slowly along.
Speaking to that, again, from my experience, I've come across many sort of HR professionals or training experts per se, and they find it's one of the hardest combos to crack. And I think that's why what you and your team or your company delivers out is so important, because I'm sure there's going to be people out there who want to reach out to you to understand, because traditional leadership programs, they may work to some regard, but you've created a much more bespoke based on, I think, 3 levels: specialist, expert, and master expert, or something like that. You said expertise. Yeah. And obviously there's a lot more there we could discover operationally how that works. But I think that is so important, because I think a lot of training experts and HR people kind of bang their heads because they'll roll out something or they'll hire a traditional management leadership course, and they cost whatever, thousands of kroner or dollars or whatever it is per person. And, the return on investment on that, within 72 hours, more than likely, most of the people have gone back to default or just maybe a little above default, but the return on that investment is negligible. And so that's why I really wanted to have you on the show, because I think there's a huge hunger out there for this expertise expertship versus leadership training.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things, you and I have probably both done lots of leadership programs, run leadership programs, and the biggest difference I notice is that there's 2 differences. The first is, we do a leadership program, and at the end of the workshop element or whatever, people make a list of things they're going to do differently. And then, you check in with them 2 months downstream, 4 months downstream, and they've done maybe a third of those things, and that's very frustrating, and it goes to the low ROI that you were describing, return on investment. But with expertship programs, they make a list of things and they start the next day. It's extraordinary. I have a manager check-in usually 2 weeks after the workshop element of some of our programs. So it's a triangulation session between the expert and their coach, which might be me in this instance, and their manager. And their manager will routinely say, this person is completely different from what they were 3 weeks ago, like straight away. And one of the things that the managers will have noticed is they're asking to go and meet customers. They're asking to go and meet stakeholders. They're asking lots of questions. They are thinking and acting differently from day one. And this goes to the message of unleashed potential here, the unfulfilled potential that most senior people leaders have large groups of these people ready to rock and roll. You just got to let them go, and you'll see the results. And even though it's quite a difficult concept to sell into a lot of organizations, once they start, they generally they go big, Jason. So, and that's not because we're great facilitators or trainers or what have you. It's exactly as you were describing. It's needed. There's and there's an opportunity to really improve the effectiveness of the workforce sitting right there, as yet unfulfilled.
So to create this sort of sustainable growth and development within these individuals, I mean, from your expertise and your knowledge, I mean, at what point? Obviously, you have the training, then you follow up with coaching every so often. But how long, again, in general, is it where you guys can kind of drop off the radar, you can fade into the background, and they are able to be self-sustaining to some extent?
Yeah, it's very possible. I mean, I'd love to tell all of your listeners and you that what we're doing is complete rocket science, but actually it's just sort of kind of advanced common sense, really. And it's just, and I'm not being too critical of all the talent teams because their budget and their mandate tends to be on leadership because that's what senior leaders tell them to spend their time on. What I'm arguing is that if senior leaders really looked at who the most important people in their organization were, they'll find a lot of them are subject matter experts and they need development as well. So, we've published some books. There's a book out there called Master Expert, which is basically a textbook to do all of this. People can simply go and buy it on Amazon and read through it. There's a self-assessment people can do to see how expert they are. So part of our role is definitely to do that technology transfer that you're describing and get organizations to be able to do it themselves. We accredit large organizations to run programs, design their own programs themselves. They usually start with us as a pilot, just to proof, but they don't have to. We've got an assessment, a global assessment, so you can figure out how expert you are if you're an SME out there, called the Expertship 360, and that helps you figure out, and there's a global benchmark on that assessment. So there are lots of tools that are very, very low cost and people can get started with straight away without having to engage expensive consultants. And definitely our objective, we're a tiny company in Sydney, our objective is to help as many experts as possible. I mentioned there's 40 million out there at the beginning of the call. We'd like all 40 million to be helped, but we certainly can't do it. So very, very open to anybody connecting with us and saying, where do I start? We're very happy to offer, some free advice and even that expertship model I described with the 3 layers, that's free and available off our website, so people can just download it and start working with it tomorrow morning.
That's brilliant. So just quickly though, you're based in Sydney, but do you sometimes run these trainings online?
Yeah, so we do them online. We do them around the world. So I referenced New York recently. I was in London recently, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia. We're hoping to start something shortly in your original home country, Canada, and so on. So. And everything's able to be done. The one good thing that COVID did for our industry is we can do everything online now. I don't think there are many good things about COVID, but that was one of them. So, yes, it doesn't really matter where anyone is in the world. We've got different foreign language coaches that we have. So our objective is to help as many experts in your organization unleash their potential, and anything we can do to help, whether for free or on a paid basis, we're happy to do. And it's also why I'm really grateful for you reaching out to us as a guest for the podcast.
Well, I'll be sure to leave all the contact information and your book, Master Expert. I will also leave a link to Amazon where people can pick it up. And I highly recommend, reaching out to Alistair Gordon to have a deeper conversation on this. Alistair, I just want to thank you again for showing up and being very flexible between Sydney and Oslo. It's not always easy to find a civil time to do it, but you bent over backwards, and I very much appreciate that. So thank you very much, Alistair, for being on the show today and sharing your expertise.
Well, thank you for the invite, and thank you for the brilliant questions.
In the last part of our conversation, Alistair and I focused on how technical experts can benefit from training that's designed with their unique needs in mind. Now, traditional leadership programs often fall short for these individuals because they don't address the specific challenges and pressures technical experts face. I shared how breaking training down into how the brain works has been effective in my experience. And Alistair, well, he agreed that respecting the perspective of technical experts is key. We discussed the idea of expertship, and that's a way to help technical experts grow into their roles while staying true to their strengths. We also touched on the challenges technical experts often encounter in large organizations. Miscommunication between departments and unclear career paths, well, they can make SMEs feel stuck. They can make them feel undervalued. And Alistair pointed out, quite frankly and quite rightly, that those who benefit the most from expertship programs are often the least likely to recognize the need for them. And it becomes a clear reminder that growth starts with self-awareness and a willingness to step outside of the technical bubble. I mean, those are just some of the points. Those are the things that I plucked out. But there's a lot of insights that you can gather, that you can pull from this by just rewinding and replaying. But for deeper exploration and discovery of this idea, and I think it's a very unique way of moving from leadership to expertship, I will leave all of Alistair Gordon's contact information and website in the show notes. Alistair, I just want to send you a personal thank you for such a brilliant conversation. I haven't had a conversation based on this evolution from leadership to expertship, or the other way around, vice versa. And it does take a little more of a bespoke training program or design to meet the needs and the wants and the wishes of SMEs. So thank you very much. Well, folks, that brings us to a tail end of yet another episode. I will see you at the tail end of this week also for Bite Size Fridays, where we will continue the exploration of the contrarian mindset and the skills needed to navigate challenges, to navigate complexities and change, to find a way to build that inner resilience. All right, folks. Until then, keep well, keep strong, and we'll speak soon.